The day I told my roommate that her dress looked beautiful, she looked at me for a few seconds with tears already gathering in her eyes and quietly smiled as if she had finally discovered something she had been afraid to admit. Then she said, "You didn't mean the dress." I remember feeling my heart stop because I knew she was right. The dress was only fabric. It was the way she stood inside it, shoulders pulled back despite everything life had thrown at her, trying to convince herself that she was still worth looking at with kindness. And before I tell you how a simple compliment changed both our lives, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who may need it, and subscribe to our channel so we can keep building a community where stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can reach places words alone never could. My roommate's name was Elodie Mercer, and when I first met her, I honestly thought she was one of the most difficult people I had ever encountered. She moved into the spare bedroom of my small apartment during the coldest month of the year, carrying 2 suitcases, a cardboard box filled with books, and an expression that seemed to say she had already apologized to the world for taking up too much space. She was 29, worked long hours at a small architectural firm, and rarely spoke about herself. She paid her portion of the rent on time, cleaned the kitchen obsessively, and disappeared into her room whenever I had friends over. She never complained, but somehow her silence felt heavier than complaining ever could. I was 27 and had always believed that people should simply say what was wrong when something hurt them. Elodie seemed to believe the opposite. She swallowed everything. At first, I mistook her quietness for arrogance. When I asked about her day, she would smile politely and say it had been fine. When I offered her dinner, she would say she had already eaten, even when I knew she had not. When I invited her to join me for coffee at a little neighborhood cafe during our lunch break, she would invent some unfinished task. I started telling myself that she did not like me. I never considered that perhaps she was simply afraid of becoming attached to anyone. There was one thing I noticed, though. Whenever she passed a mirror, she never looked at her own reflection for more than a second. Her eyes always moved away first. Weeks passed, and our apartment developed an unusual rhythm. I would make breakfast in the morning, she would leave early for work, and sometime during the afternoon she would return briefly to collect something before going back to the office. We were roommates, but we lived almost like strangers sharing the same walls. Then one Saturday afternoon, something changed. I was cleaning the living room when I heard the sound of a box falling in her bedroom. I went to check if she was all right and found her sitting on the floor surrounded by old photographs, letters, and clothing. One photograph had fallen face up near my feet. It showed Elodie several years younger, standing beside a handsome man outside a courthouse, both of them smiling as if the future belonged entirely to them. She quickly gathered the photographs and told me she was fine. I respected her privacy and walked away, but the image stayed with me. Later, I learned the man was her former fiancé, Graham. They had been together for nearly 6 years and had planned a wedding. Then, less than 2 months before the ceremony, he had left. Not because he had met someone else, and not because there had been some dramatic betrayal. He had simply told her that he no longer felt the same way. What hurt Elodie most was not losing him. It was what happened afterward. She had spent years believing she was building a life with someone, only to discover that he had quietly stopped choosing her long before he finally said goodbye. She had also recently lost her mother, the person she had depended on most after the breakup. Her mother had been the one who constantly reminded her that she was beautiful, capable, and deserving of love. After her death, Elodie seemed to lose the last voice that spoke gently to her. She became convinced that something about her was fundamentally wrong. She blamed her personality, her appearance, her ambition, her body, even the way she laughed. She began treating herself like a problem that needed to be solved. I discovered the depth of her pain one afternoon when I came home early and found her standing in front of the hallway mirror wearing an old blue dress. It was not particularly fashionable, but it was elegant and fit her beautifully. She was holding a pair of earrings in her hand, staring at herself with an expression I had never seen before. There was sadness in her eyes, but underneath it was something else, something almost like hope. She noticed me in the doorway and immediately reached for her sweater. I told her she did not need to cover herself. I told her the dress looked beautiful. She looked down, touched the fabric, and then smiled. It was a tiny smile at first, uncertain and almost embarrassed. Then she looked directly at me and said the words that changed everything, "You didn't mean the dress." I tried to laugh it off, but she shook her head. She said she had spent so long hearing people compliment her clothes while avoiding complimenting her that she had learned to understand the difference. She told me she knew I was really talking about her, and that somehow scared her more than an insult would have. I asked her why. She told me that if someone saw something beautiful in her, then eventually they might see the things she hated too. She was afraid that kindness always came with an expiration date. She had learned that people could admire you one day and abandon you the next. She said it was easier to believe that nobody really cared than to believe someone cared and risk losing them. I did not know what to say. For the first time, I understood that her distance had never been about me. She had been protecting a heart that had already been broken more times than I realized. After that afternoon, our relationship slowly changed. We started eating breakfast together. We walked to the cafe during our lunch breaks. Sometimes we talked for hours, and sometimes we simply sat together without needing to fill the silence. Elodie began telling me small things about her mother, like how she loved gardening and used to keep flowers alive long after everyone else had given up on them. She told me about the wedding dress she had once chosen and how she had eventually donated it because she could not bear to see it hanging in her closet. I told her about my own failures and insecurities, things I had never admitted to anyone because I had spent years pretending I was more confident than I really was. But healing did not happen in a straight line. There were good days and terrible ones. One afternoon, Elodie came home from work with tears in her eyes after discovering that a colleague had received the promotion she had worked toward for months. She locked herself in her room and refused to eat. I wanted to tell her she was better than everyone else, but I knew empty encouragement would not help. Instead, I left a plate of food outside her door and sat on the hallway floor until she eventually opened it. She told me she was tired of always feeling like she had to prove that she deserved to be there. I reminded her that being overlooked did not mean being unworthy. It only meant that someone had failed to recognize what she brought to the table. Several weeks later, Elodie received an invitation to a charity luncheon hosted by a major design organization. It was an important event for her career, and she had been nominated for an Emerging Designer Award. But she immediately decided she would not attend. She said there would be people there who knew Graham, people who remembered their engagement, and people who might look at her and wonder what had happened to the woman who was supposed to be married by now. She was afraid they would see her as someone whose life had fallen apart. I refused to let her hide. I told her she had spent too much time measuring herself through other people's eyes. She deserved to walk into that room because of the work she had created, not because of who had left her. For the first time, she agreed to try. On the afternoon of the luncheon, she came out of her bedroom wearing a simple green dress. She had chosen it herself. Her hair was loosely pinned back, and she wore the earrings that had been sitting untouched in a drawer for years. When she stepped into the living room, she looked nervous but different. She was not trying to disappear. She was standing there, allowing herself to be seen. I told her she looked beautiful, and this time she did not ask whether I meant the dress. The luncheon became one of the most important afternoons of her life. Elodie did not win the award, but something better happened. One of the senior designers approached her after her presentation and told her that her work had moved them because it carried an honesty they rarely saw in young designers. Elodie thanked them, and for the first time, I saw her accept a compliment without trying to explain why it was not true. Then, unexpectedly, Graham appeared. He was attending the same event through a professional connection. I saw the color leave Elodie's face when she noticed him. He approached cautiously and apologized for how he had handled their breakup. He admitted that he had been selfish and cowardly. He told her that he had spent years convincing himself that leaving had been necessary, but he had never understood the damage he caused by making her feel as though she had been the reason their relationship failed. I expected Elodie to cry. I expected anger. Instead, she listened quietly. She did not insult him, and she did not ask him to come back. She simply told him that she had forgiven him a long time ago, but forgiveness did not mean she wanted the old life back. She said she had finally learned that losing someone did not mean losing herself. Graham looked at her for a moment, nodded, and walked away. On the way home that afternoon, Elodie told me she had expected seeing him to destroy her. Instead, she realized she no longer needed anything from him. Not an apology, not an explanation, not even regret. She had spent years waiting for someone else to confirm her worth, and finally she had given that responsibility back to herself. Months later, Elodie received the promotion she had once thought she would never get. She moved into her own apartment soon afterward, not because we had fallen out, but because she had finally become comfortable standing on her own. Before she left, she gave me a small framed photograph of the two of us laughing at a cafe table. Behind the photograph, she had written a short note thanking me for seeing her during a time when she could not see herself. I still remember the first afternoon she wore that blue dress. Back then, I thought I had simply given my roommate a compliment. I never realized that sometimes telling someone they are beautiful is not really about their appearance at all. Sometimes it is about reminding them that the person underneath all the disappointment, rejection, fear, and regret is still there. Still worthy. Still alive. Still capable of being loved. Elodie taught me something I will never forget: people do not always need someone to rescue them. Sometimes they simply need someone who refuses to look away while they rescue themselves. And sometimes forgiveness is not about giving another person permission to hurt you again. It is about finally giving yourself permission to stop carrying what they did. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Before you go, tell our community in the comments what you believe the most powerful lesson in Elodie's story was. Was it forgiveness, self-worth, letting go, or simply having someone believe in you when you have stopped believing in yourself? Your words might be exactly what another person needs to read today. And if there is one thing I hope you carry with you after this story, let it be this: never underestimate the power of a kind word. You may think you are complimenting someone's dress, their work, their smile, or the meal they prepared, but you never know what that person is fighting privately. You never know how long it has been since someone made them feel seen. You never know whether your kindness might become the small light they follow out of a very dark season. Elodie once believed that being left meant she was not enough. Eventually, she discovered something much more beautiful. Being left did not define her. Being overlooked did not erase her talent. Being rejected did not make her unlovable. Her past was a chapter, not a sentence. And when she finally stood in front of that mirror again, she no longer needed someone else to tell her she was beautiful. She already knew.